Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Michael Maggiato, Dean of the College of Sciences and Humanities. On behalf of President Paul Ferguson and Provost Terry King, it is my privilege to welcome you to Ball State's annual Yom HaShoah event. I thank the Office of the Provost, the Honors College, the Ball State Center for Peace and Conflict, College of Sciences and Humanities, and especially the Jewish Studies Project for their support in making this event possible. The Jewish Studies program at Ball State University is funded by the Benjamin and Bessie Ziegler Fund. It was established to provide the university and the community with an understanding of and an appreciation for Jewish history, Jewish culture, and the Jewish faith. Specific initiatives include faculty development and course offerings in Jewish studies, library acquisitions for the Bracken Library's Judaica collection, and support for programs, lectures, and cultural events such as today's. How much is a human life worth? That is a disturbingly pertinent question for Americans since the 9/11 terrorist attack and the subsequent days of well-publicized product failures that have killed and maimed so many more. Lawyers, accountants, actuaries, and other professionals seek to find a reasonable dollar figure to compensate what friends and loved ones cannot fathom, and what even our finest poetry can only approach. How much are the products of a life worth? The things that those now gone imagined, designed, perfected, and ultimately made. The businesses they built, the firms that bore their names. What about the things that gave them pleasure? A tennis racket, a painting, a violin, or the things that bore witness to their spiritual side, a family menorah perhaps. Conceptually, it may be easier to put a price tag on things, for there are costs of capital and labor and materials that can be estimated, and there are markets where such items are bought and sold that set market prices. Still, it is very much like valuing the place where you grew up. You can put a dollar figure on a house, but perhaps not on a home. Now suppose that those lives, that physical and intellectual property, those very personal expressions of the hearts and souls of loved ones were stolen, not by acts of criminals who, if caught, would be prosecuted and punished by the state for having committed felonies, but stolen by the state itself as a matter of public policy, or stolen under the guise of a market, corrupted by the collusion of the state. How does one compensate from the states that exist today, from the people who vote, frame policy, and pay taxes today, the survivors, the loved ones whose families were destroyed, whose property was confiscated, and whose memories were hijacked by a state of the past? How do you make rational and model mathematically something that is fundamentally beyond rationality, but which occurred nonetheless, with methodical precision and as a consequence of public policy openly proclaimed and publicly witnessed? For some, I'm sure, the answer lies in books by Kafka. Yet those are the kinds of questions that our guest today has spent years asking and answering. Martha Raviv is a Holocaust survivor. She and her mother survived Bergen-Belsen. Her father died at Buchenwald. She is Austrian by birth, Israeli by choice, and a lawyer by profession, a counselor and litigator of commercial and civil law. For the last 2 decades, she has worked pro bono to help needy victims of the Holocaust, chiefly Austrians. She participated in the negotiations that led to the General Settlement Agreement between the United States and Austria, signed in 2001, that dealt with the restitution of assets and real estate and the provision of social benefits to the victims of the Nazi regime. Since 2008, she has been a member of the board of directors of the Company for the Location and Restitution of Holocaust Victims' Assets, which has succeeded in locating more than $1.25 billion shekels, part of which was given back to heirs and most of which was provided to needy survivors. Please join me in welcoming to Ball State, Martha Raviv.
Thank you very much, everybody who has come here, and especially you, the professor, and all the professors who are here, and the students, and most of the students, I will say, are the age of my oldest grandchildren, and I have also very young ones, which are only at the age of 3 years old. So it's a big space of ages I'm grandmother of. I would like to emphasize some words which are written and in the when you advertise my coming here, and what you told the audience here, which means that I spent time in Bergen-Belsen and that my father died. I would not use the word spending because being in Bergen-Belsen was very far from spending time usually in a camp. So that was a horrible, very horrible prison-like camp where a lot of people died from hunger and diseases. I had the luck to overcome this. And when you use the word died for my father, I'll tell you one thing. I also received an original certificate of death from Weimar, from the Nazi Republic. And they said, my father died from heart attack. When I, with the help of a Catholic organization, put a tombstone on the ashes which were brought to Vienna by my mother and paid for, I thought it is not right to say he died, and I used the expression, he was murdered. And I thought, oh, this is terrible. For a lawyer, she doesn't say the truth. But my father was only 40 years old, and a heart attack, unusual life wouldn't happen. So I did with it. Only in the year 2003, I received a book from Buchenwald. And there was written, and you'll see the slide afterwards, in very clear letters. My father was killed in a gas chamber in Berenburg. So there was no lie. It was really, he was murdered. And I'll show you afterwards, you'll have the slide stating the two certificates, with the book and the real certificate. And so I'm here to tell you the story of the whole family. We'll start perhaps with the first thing, the liberation of Vittel. When Professor Francine Friedman suggested that I come here, I really did not take into account how hard the trip would be and how hard it is for me to speak about that subject. But the most important thing for me was to express my thanks to the American Army, which liberated Vittel, the camp I was in, which was a detention camp because the people in there were, their destination was to be exchanged for prisoners of war, and not to be sent to the camps where they get murdered. But the things changed in the time I was there. But I had another reason to come here. The other reason, oh, here. Okay. The other reason I'm here, because I want to give very special thanks to a young Jewish officer who gave me a mezuzah, and I was told afterwards that all Jewish officers used to get from the army a mezuzah. But all things I'm telling you are a process of learning. When I talked about this, somebody told me, somebody who was in Theresienstadt told me that the officers of the Jewish officers of the American Army, almost everybody wore a mezuzah, and that's how I have one on me. And I really want to cherish with enormous gratitude that officer, because he blessed me, and I think, and you may think, that in reality the mezuzah protected me, and with the God blessing, I'm able to come here. I was able to come here and to tell you my story, and that's why I really have come here. And you can see that picture was taken, I think 2 years after the liberation, and you can see that I was wearing the mezuzah I received. And now, my family. My family before the Holocaust was my father, Leo Falkenflik. It's Falkenflik and Falkenflik, so both the names are the same. He was about 40 years old when the Holocaust happened, and this is my mother and my sister. My sister is 10 years older than I am, and that's me before the Holocaust with the 2 teddy bears. And in order to understand my story, I have to tell you what was the origin of my parents. Both of my parents were from Galicia, which according to the pact done between Ribbentrop and Molotov, became Russia. And under communists, agreement on 28 September 1939. And as it became Russian communist, my uncle, the brother of my mother, was a merchant who had big stores in Stanislava, where my mother was born, and they took over. He was, could you say, a bourgeois. So they sent him to Siberia because he was rich. And in fact, this saved his life. And after the war, he went back home, but couldn't even take back the assets of the family because they told him that if he will take something from there, he'll be killed. So he ran away, and afterwards he settled in the United States and had here a big department store in Michigan. After he was in Siberia, the things changed in Galicia, and there was the Operation Barbarossa, which the Nazis conquered again this part of Russia, of Galicia, and once they conquered that part, they just did what was expected of them to do. The Nazis, what you heard in the lecture you got from the professor, and the whole family was murdered. It means 2 brothers and 2 sisters married, and their families and their children, and my grandmother, all of them were murdered. My grandfather had to bury them, but he was kept alive because he was the owner of a big leather factory, and they didn't know how to manage the factory. So he was kept alive in order that the Nazi army will get leather boots, and as long as they didn't know how to manage the factory, he stayed alive. Once they knew how to do the things, he was also murdered. And after, I have here, this is a telegram which my grandfather sent to my mother, because after they murdered all the family, he asked at least my mother to write that she is alive, that he knows that somebody of the family is still alive and not murdered. So that's, please write, Sternberg is the name of my grandfather. At the same time, if I go back to Vienna, Vienna was willfully annexed in Austria. Whole Austria was annexed to Germany, to the Nazi Germany. 99.9% of the Austrians voted for the annexion. Afterwards, they tried to say it was not exactly so, but the Austrian wanted to be part of the Nazi Reich, and the laws of Nuremberg were enforced in Austria, which means that there was persecution and separation of families, humiliation. Jews lost their job. Jewish businesses were boycotted. There was curfew. You couldn't leave your home after 8 o'clock in the evening. And they used to abuse people in Vienna by letting them kneel and clean with toothbrushes the trottoir, the walking path. And the really bad was at the Kristallnacht, which is the night of the broken glasses, where none of the synagogues were left whole, and only the principal synagogue in Vienna, which was built in the building, and it would not show outside that it was still stayed whole, and you can see it today also. My father, at that time, was already arrested. So my mother, at the age of 38, had to decide what is she going to do now. Is she going to stay in Vienna or emigrate, or is she going to leave the place? She knew one thing. Because my father was in prison, she wanted to give him hope. So she decided to stay on in Vienna, and she decided that she will not be able to stay in Vienna in this case with 2 children. So she had the choice of letting my sister to go by herself at the age of 12 on the train, leaving Vienna all by herself with no phone. What you have, she didn't know if she could arrive. She left Vienna by train to Trieste. In Trieste, she had to find the ship. She went with the crowd and came to the ship, and she arrived in Palestine at that time, but she didn't know how to go off the ship. So the sailors found her in the ship, and only after the captain came, she went out of the harbor and stood there waiting. She had the luck of finding the professor of Hebrew, where she was in school, and he took care of her because she didn't know the language. She didn't know how to contact anybody to find where to stay. That is the story of my sister, and here you have how she went from Austria to what at that time was Palestine. My mother didn't know a thing about my sister. She didn't know if she arrived safely or not. And she knew only, I don't know if anybody can imagine what a mother has to go through in waiting to hear if her daughter has arrived safely. She heard it only on September 1841. She was sent away in December 1939. So that was, and if you read well, it says that you are allowed to write exactly, with the Red Cross, you are allowed to write only 25 words. So if you count them, these are the words. And that is a translation of what my sister wrote to my mother. In the meantime, I'm going back to what happened to my father. Well, my father was arrested on September 1939, when he came back from synagogue after the prayer on Saturday. We were not a very religious family, but we used to have the habit of going to the synagogue. And when he came home from the synagogue, he went from the synagogue with the rabbi so they could see that he was Jewish, because usually my father didn't wear a yarmulke or had his head covered. And he was taken to prison. We have a book in English, I don't remember the name, but I met the person whose plaster cast mask was done in the year 2003, because he succeeded to be released from Buchenwald. So, and his name, the author of the book is Evans, or how you would say Evans, yes? And he described what happened to the people who were in that prison after they were captured. They were beaten up, and when you look at the picture of my father, the first picture, and you look at this, you see the whole lower part of the face is swollen, because with rubber clubs they beat them up, and what he writes, they had to lick with their thumb the stairs going up in the prison. That's the way they wanted to show the superiority of the Nazi race, the inferiority of the Jewish people. They can clean floors or with toothbrushes or with licking them with their own tongue. And from there, after taking it, I can also tell you that there is a big case in which the hair of my father still is in the museum, Historical Natural Museum of Vienna, where they kept the hair, and they have also plaster cast masks of people. And they made these measurements in order, again, to show the inferiority of the Jewish race. But I don't think that they ever succeeded. There was a possibility to send money to Buchenwald, and a possibility to get letters. So this is a letter from my father from Buchenwald, and it's encoded messages if we wanted to know if something happened, and in order not to disclose people who hid themselves, it was written in code and not straight. But in fact, my name is written there, and he wanted to know what I received for a present, because I was born on January 20, and you see the letter is 22 February. And here you have the instructions which were given by the Nazis, how you should write the letters. You have to keep to count the words, and you have to write it in such way that everybody can read it, because they didn't want you to tell what is happening and going on in the camp in Buchenwald. And when I started my speech, I told you that my father was murdered. So you see, that is the original certificate of death. He is stating that he died from a heart attack, and here is the book of Buchenwald, where I learned in the year 2003 about that he was transferred to a hospital which was called euthanasie, and where they murdered people. They started with doing this with health, with people who were not healthy enough. And afterwards, a euthanasie, you know what it means. It's murder. It's not murder. It's death out of rachamim, mercy. It's a wonderful way to talk about things. And I told you that only with the time I learned what happened. And also the papers from the camps in Germany, of what happened in Germany, were not open for the public. So only after they let people look into the archives, there was found the page where the bureaucracy of the German was intact. So whenever my mother sent money, from the money, in order that he could buy himself something, they would take off the travel expenses, because Buchenwald was a concentration camp in where there was no possibility to work, and the people, the prisoners, were transferred to get to work in other places around. And for going to the places to work for, they had to pay. And how did they pay? From the little money they were allowed to get from home. And this shows here exactly that he had to pay for going to work for the Nazis in other places. And I come back when I told you that 400 men were present in Vienna. From these 400, there stayed alive about 30 people, at all, 30 men only. And most of them died in Buchenwald. Really at the beginning, because there were also diseases. And here I've found afterwards a letter which is in English. And it shows you exactly how the Reich, the Nazi, profited from a prisoner in the camp. You can read it by yourself and see. And what I like most, is additional proceeds. You understand? So this was not taken alive, but at the profit after 9 months was 1,631 Reichsmark. And now I'm coming back to the story of myself. I stayed with my mother in Vienna because my mother wanted that my father will not lose hope, and she waited for him to find a way to come back home and stay with the family. So, because if you don't have hope, you can't go on working very hard without getting any food. And that was the way people, the prisoners, were in Buchenwald. You see that how much the expenses are for food for the prisoners. There's almost nothing paid. So they were really starved. And when we stayed in Vienna, I told before there was already the curfew, and you had, I've even brought you to see the original badge, yellow badge you had to wear. I didn't wear it because I was too young, but my mother did. And in order to keep alive, I really don't know till today how she usually had some information, and we ran away from our flat. We didn't stay even at that time in the original flat. We were transferred to the second district in Vienna, from where the transports lived for the concentration camps. And at first, there was a possibility that friends of you who didn't collaborate with the Nazis would hide you. So I said, we stayed with our seamstress. You probably don't know what means seamstress, because you go into the store and buy everything done. But at that time, you had somebody to sew for you. And this was the seamstress my mother usually worked, who worked for my mother, and she let us stay for a night in her flat. We came there, she was sure there will nobody visit her, and she had 3 dogs, fox terriers, and the bell rings, and everybody gets very, very worried. I don't understand what happens, but I can remember the faces, and at the same time the bell rings, the 3 dogs bark very, very loudly. And the seamstress used the time that the dogs were barking and took us to the bathroom. The bathroom that day were little rooms which were transferred from being a room into a bathroom. So we could stay there. She put us in the bathroom, and the dog barked very loudly, and whenever somebody moved in the flat. So nobody tried to come into the bathroom. It's only in the morning the person left. When we knew the person left, she never again invited us, because the person was a high officer, a high Nazi officer, who disliked dogs, and he didn't know how to go on with the dogs. And I, from that moment on, was a really lover of dogs. So afterwards, nobody let us in. We had to find a solution. If you know that somebody is going to fetch you, how do you run away? And with a child, if you are a person alone, might be easier. So where can you stay with a child? You can stay with a child at a railway station, because if you have missed a train, there's a place to wait for. So usually we used to go and stay in railway stations during the night in order that the Nazi will not fetch us from home. And when I say the hiding, it means that because of the curfew, first of all, my mother had to take off the Judenstern, yes, because she couldn't walk anywhere with that sign on. So that was a special way of doing this, which I remember Vienna has very big old houses with double entrance. So the first house is in the front of the road, and then there is a little yard, and there's another big house. So somewhere she used to find a corner. She knew Vienna well because she learned there. She was at school in Vienna during the First World War. And she used to take off the Judenstern, and so we could go to the station, because otherwise we couldn't have stayed in the station. But now, as things get worse from day to day, she had to seek for a way to get a better protection. And as I was told by the historians, it was a very unique way which my mother found. She went to the Swedish consul and she said, look, that's why I told you about my family. She said, my family, my father, and the father of my father, which means grandfather also from the side of my father, all of them lived in Galicia, which was Russia at the time. I told you before the murder. And so you see that's the birthplace. Please give me the protection. The Swedish consulate took care at that time of the affairs of the Russians. So I don't know how, but I can only tell you I had a very good-looking mother and a very charming lady, and she didn't bow. She always stood straight and asked for this, and we received a piece of paper. That piece of paper, that was our life insurance. And with that piece of paper, we stayed on because at later times, the war in Russia got tough, and Germany or the Nazis did not succeed, and they decided that they would like to have prisoners exchange. And I was with my mother on the list to be exchanged for prisoners, German Nazi prisoners coming from Russia, and I would be sent to Russia. But in the meantime, I was imprisoned. First of all, I was imprisoned in Vienna, and here you see also that's a certificate stating that I was imprisoned in Vienna. And here you can see how the Nazis added to the names. Every Jew woman was named Sarah. You say the same name. Gittel, it's a Jewish name of my mother, who usually was called Gena. Sarah and Martha, Sarah. Every Jew man had the name Israel. And every Jewish passport had a big red J on it, so everybody should know that he is handling a passport of a Jew and will not be nice to him. When we were at that place, which was a place where they gathered, it's called Sammellager, they gathered people just before putting them on the transport to the concentration camp or to the death camp. At that time, when I was there, all the people who were in that place were sent to their death because most of them were handicapped children, and there was no use for handicapped persons, and even if they were not Jewish. So all of them were sent to be murdered. And my mother knew probably at that time that Auschwitz is a place where you get murdered. And she knew that Theresienstadt is a camp which is shown off. It's for example, to the Red Cross, that there they live wonderfully, the Jews, and they can get on with their profession. So my mother did what is very, very unexpected. And when we stood, I remember standing before the table of the people who are supposed to send you to Auschwitz, saying, I have not a claim, bakasha, a request. Please, please send me to Theresienstadt. The answer was, and the better thing you don't know how to ask for? My mother said, okay, please send me home. And you can't believe, but the people said, the mother with the child, go home. So we stayed on for some time in Vienna. And now we stayed on in Vienna in that way which I described to you till August, September 1943. Whenever you heard at night a truck passing and stopping, it had a very, very special noise making and in the stop, like a siren, and everybody would freeze. After the stop of the truck, you heard the boots of the Nazi SS coming up the stairs, and that noise stays in your ears forever. And once or twice they came to fetch us, and we didn't go. Once I was very sick, my mother pleaded that I have very high fever, please let me stay with the child. And somehow there was somebody humane enough to let us stay in the flat. But in the end, they came and we were taken to the prison in Vienna in a car, in a green car truck, which had the name, the Green Heinrich. I don't know why, but that was. And I almost fell out of the truck when the door opened because I wasn't near the door of the truck. Afterwards, I never was in the truck at the door. It was in the middle of the truck, or let us say, as far as possible from the door. In Vienna, we were about 6 weeks in a very dark cell, and everybody around us had Russian passports. We were the only one for just a piece of paper which I showed to you. But we stayed there, and from that time, from once we came to the prison of Vienna, we were moved from one prison to another, about 8 prisons, different prisons. And because I'm telling you a story of a child, it's the story of a picture book. So what are the prisons I remember? The prisons I remember are the prison in Prague. The prison in Prague had cruelty and humanity, both things. The cruelty was, we got to the prison in Prague, we had to stand still facing the wall from 6 o'clock in the morning till midnight. And in that group of mine, there was one person who had a shorter leg, so he couldn't stand still. I stand this way, and he stand on the other way. Look at this wall. When he moved a little, there was no problem for them. They just took the revolver and shot him down. I saw how they took away the corpse. After, at about 10 or 11 o'clock, the guards changed. Means the officer who was in charge before and shut down that guy was changed by somebody else. The officer who came in looked and said, asked me, for how long do you stay there? And when did you eat for the last time? I didn't answer. I wouldn't answer. I was intelligent enough. After I was seen, somebody shot down, I will not talk, I will not move, because that would mean that he's going to shoot me. So he repeated, coward, in German, of course I spoke German. Coward, why don't you answer me? At this point, my mother took over, and she said, the last time we ate was in 6 o'clock in the morning, and since then we are standing near the wall. So he asked me, come to my desk, and I was afraid. Only after my mother told me, I moved to his desk. He gave me a chair, told me to sit down in the chair, took out his sandwich for the night, and told me, go on, eat my sandwich. And after time, we were sent to cells, and that prison was at that time a very new prison, looking very nice because it had white walls, and it was especially for political prisoners. And there is law for prisoners. You have to let them get some fresh air once a day. So at this prison, we were treated like human beings, and we were sent out in the yard with very high walls and walked around. When we walked around, the prisoners saw suddenly a child. What does a child do in prison? So they probably got the information, and the next second night, the ward came and asked for my mother. And you should know, whenever somebody asked for my mother, I was trembling. I was so afraid if they asked her to the door. And she came in and pushed in her way a big paper bag, brown paper bag, full of food, means apples and bread. This is for the child. I always say they use the name child if it was not a real living thing. It's like a package, that child. So, and thanks to them, to that parcel, I had a little more food to eat during the way to till Bergen-Belsen. The next prison I remember was just the real opposite. It was a prison, Halle an der Saale, an old prison in Germany, full of murders, of people who were sentenced, criminals, and the cells were very crowded, and it started to be cold. So when we came and we had some coat on or some scarf, the moment my mother turned around, the scarf was away. Whatever she had was taken away. Everything was stolen because they were thieves, but I couldn't blame them afterwards because they were really very cold. But this was not the only thing. In the morning, there comes the ward looking for the child and telling my mother like this: we have here in Halle an der Saale children of Sinti Romans, which at that time were called gypsies. So I'm going to take her to the gypsy children. And my mother said, that's my courageous mother, no, the child stays with me and she will not go to the gypsies. And only 3 months ago, I saw, because I didn't see films about the Holocaust because I usually get so upset, so I didn't want to break down. I saw a film which was taken in the year 1986. They argued about the commemoration of the Holocaust in Berlin. And one of the persons which was interviewed was the president of the gypsies. You excuse me if I use the word gypsy. And he said something about Halle an der Saale. I said, but I didn't understand exactly what. So I asked my grandson, who is now just starting the army, almost your age, and we went to YouTube and we found the film and we found the chapter where the president of the Gypsies talked. And he said, in Halle and the Saale, that's the prison, there were experiments done, medical experiments, to the Gypsies children. And that's where I should have been taken to, and he said, I was sterilized there, and you can see afterwards my wonderful family to say what big luck I had. But my mother paid for this. He took the rubber club and beat her in the face till most of the teeth fell out and she was covered with blood, but I stayed with my mother. That's Halle and the Saale. Afterwards, the train, and you know, we never knew where the train is going to take us. You knew only when you passed the station where probably the train was going. And at that time, the train was going north-west, and we suddenly had, I told you about cold weather in Halle and the Saale, and in that train we had very hot weather. That was not a train for cattle. These were trains special for prisoners. And for prisoners, the train has a cell which is meant to be for perhaps one person. On the most, you can have in that little cell, which I couldn't tell you, it was just twice, I think, of this, just to sit down and have, you could stay one person, and we stayed, my mother and me, and two Yugoslav from Yugoslavia, young women. And as it began to be very hot, we almost suffocated. But there was a small window on the train. The window had a fence done of iron, very thick, iron in very small holes. At that time, when you wore leather shoes and you wanted the leather to keep for more time, you put nails on it. The nails were done like half a ball of very tiny things like this. And with when the train went faster, one of these girls took off her shoe and bumped with the nails the window, and so the window was broken and we could breathe. When we came to the station, another person of our group was taken off the train as a corpse because she suffocated on that train, and we stayed alive because of those two young women who had the way to break that window. And we came to a prison called, in the place which was there was a wonderful orchard when we passed it, called Hildesheim. In Hildesheim, the first thing they did, which you probably have read, is an appel. Appel is the way that they counted, put every prisoner in a row, and you were counted and seen if nobody is missing. So we came there, and the first thing was to let us stand in the appel, and the appel can take sometimes hours. And the people, after the train, which almost suffocated, were very tired. And my mother was the youngest person in that group of Russian persons. So, as I told before, nobody talks to the commander without being addressed. But my mother did. She told him, I ask for a chair. The answer was, what, do you want a chair for yourself? He said, no. Near me is standing a woman. She is almost fainting. Please, give her a chair. The commander gave her a chair, and she could sit down at the appel. I don't know, when you will read about it, you will say that it's just an unthinkable way of asking the Nazi commander to give a chair. Nobody will believe me that this happened. But in order that you believe me, I'll tell you what happened afterwards. We were in that prison on Sunday. And on Sunday, the prison was almost, it was a nice place, a small town. There were almost no persons in the prison. The prison was very quiet, and the ward comes to fetch my mother. Whenever somebody came to fetch my mother, I was trembling. I was so afraid. And she left the cell and went to the commander, because she was called to the commander, that commander who gave the chair. And he told her, you must have the courage and stay on. Don't give in. The winds of war have changed. We are losing the battle in Russia. So keep on, do your best, and stay alive with the child. For me, she came back, I think, perhaps a day later, which was probably 10 minutes or something like this, not more. But when we could see the luggage, we had only one little bag with us. The bag was filled with bread, apples, and was more significant than everything, medicine. He gave medicine to be able, if we get sick, we could take some pills in order to get better. That was the most valuable thing you ever could get. We saw this only afterwards, not before, when we went to another prison and had the opportunity to see our bags. So in all this Holocaust, or where I met, there also were some angels who took care, or some humane persons who were not enough brainwashed. And we are going on the train, going on, and we come to the place called Celle, also a prison. We stayed for one night, and from there on, we didn't go on the train. There was a truck taking us. What I saw later on was Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen, I remembered because you advertised already that didn't spend there a good time. And as I told you, because I fell out almost of the first track, I was pushed inside. These tracks had, these old tracks had a little window between the driver and the back of the truck. And in that track, special track, there was done a little hole where I could see with my eye where the truck was driving. And the people waited for me to tell them where we are going. So first of all, I said, we are traveling in a wonderful avenue full of trees. It looks very, very nice to give good spirits to everybody. And I remember when the truck went on, I saw big dogs, electricity wire, and the dogs chasing the people towards the electricity, and people getting murdered on that way. And I remember for years on end, I never spoke about that view. I said, I'll keep it to myself, because if I tell the people in the car, they'll get desperate. And I was afraid of what might outcome. And as I told you, I always learn afterwards. Half a year ago, I saw a film which is called Transport 222, which deals with Vittel, which I'm going to tell you about later on. And there they showed, okay, and there's a show, I have the, how much? I'm finishing. There they showed that the entrance was exactly how I described, although I kept it to myself. Bergen-Belsen was very difficult to live in. First of all, I was a child talking German, and there should have been exchange. The children there were children, and they talked Polish, and I didn't know how to talk, but my mother knew, so I somehow went on with them and could play a little. And the Jews in concentration camps, where there were children, used to do their best to keep them busy with something. And I remember the first time I saw Hanukkah lights being lit. I don't know how, but they had some way of not of the lights, more the Hanukkah. I remember more the Hanukkah songs. And when I asked afterwards, it's true. What I'll tell you, I've checked it, and the historians, because there were books written on my story, they all of them checked this. But what was terrible, and I'll hear till today, most of the children were orphans, which were tried to be saved with foreign passports from whatever country. And there was no food in Bergen-Belsen. And they used to cry all the night on piece of bread. And the piece of bread was already said in Polish language. I'll never forget the two words, chwalek chleb, which they cried during the night, wanting to get a piece of bread. In the morning, stood up and went on. And in Bergen-Belsen, there is another appel. Just so we stand here, counting, and they separate my group. I went on. And the people around are looking at us, saying if they are separated, their look said, they're going to die. We were taken to disinfection, to the showers in Bergen-Belsen. The showers in Bergen-Belsen, if you go to meet Dachau, you'll see some wonderful place with doesn't look anything near the showers I was in. And we were taken to the showers, so everybody, women, children, whatever we had in this group, naked, and they put open the shower. But from the shower there went no water. The people were sure they are going to be gassed. I didn't understand. So everybody was terrified. And the first prayer in the mezuzah is Shema Israel. God of Israel, hear us. And they shouted that prayer, and on the other hand of the wall, I heard the mocking laughter of the Nazis sitting and being very happy that we stupid people were afraid and they could laugh at us. And the noise, and this noise, I can hear it because I closed my ears. It was so terrifying to hear on one side laughter, one side the prayers, and suddenly there was water, and we were washed, and we came back with what was unbelievable to the same barrack we were in before. We lived on because in Bergen-Belsen there was no gas. There was not a Cyclone B, which I showed you the letter of the manufacturer of the gas industry. He wanted to have the prisoners to make the gas which was used in the jail. So we were taken away after this, again not knowing where, but this time the train was already bombed, and the army probably came nearer, but it was quite, this was in March, and D-Day was only in June. So in March, we passed the Rhine, which I thought we would not make because it was bombed, but the train passed, and we passed Strasbourg and came to the camp of Vittel, where I started my story. And Vittel was a detention camp, but when we came here, we were met by the Jewish poet named Katzenelson. He was a poet of the Shoah, and the greatest poet he wrote was the poet of my murdered people. He came to tell us that we have come to a safe place and we'll have what to eat. And two of the persons of the group which survived till Vittel died because they were so hungry that they started to eat, and the stomach gave in and it was torn, so they died because of eating. I stayed in Vittel till the liberation, and that's where we started our my testimony or witness, yes, and my happy ending. Oh, I forgot. I will only tell you one thing. When the people, I told you about the train of the film, because from Vittel, in fact, there was an exchange of people. The exchange was against Templars that were in Israel, in Palestine at that time, and that was the first time that my mother could send something to my sister in Palestine. So from there on, I was in DP places, which I was in Labourboul and in Lourdes. Whoever is here Catholic will know about Lourdes, which is a very holy place. And I was in school with the Catholics, sisters, and they asked me to stay in France because I was a brilliant pupil, although I had only stayed in France for 1.5 years. And they even promised my mother they wouldn't change my religion. But France needs persons like me. So, but I preferred, my mother decided. That's our pictures after the war. You see the first picture of my mother with the rings on the eyes. You see we're progressing from one year to the other. And this is the most important picture because I have 3 children, all the 3 of them married, all of 3 of them have children. Here is my youngest son. So come here. And he's the one whom I thank for 4 grandchildren, the smallest, which I told you, the age of 3, 4 years, then 10 and 12 years old. Then comes my middle son, this one. Here is the historian who wrote about me, and here he has 3 sons. The one I told you about, who is going to the military, is now starting military. This is Asa, Yotam, and Yenai. All are named after kings in Israel from the Bible. And you see me in the middle. And this is my daughter. She's the eldest. She has 4 children. Shachaf, Paz. Shachaf is 23. Shachaf is 16, going on to 17. Leah is 20. And the youngest is 11. That's Eli. That's, of course, her husband. This is the story of myself, and everything was told to you. I'm practicing law for 50 years. I'm working a lot pro bono for the people who had not the luck of doing a profession and being able to earn the money. And I'm doing my best in order to help the needy survivors in different kinds of ways. And I thank you for hearing my story. Just let nobody brainwash you. Stay humane. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's Hillel. That's the whole story on one leg. What? Okay. Is there any question? You want to know something? Is somebody? Okay.
Were you ever reunited with your sister?
Please speak slowly. If you so, I spoke slowly because I can't. So I don't understand if you speak quickly.
Were you ever able to see your sister again? Were you able to see your sister again?
Of course, she lives with me in Israel.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi. You were talking about the dog in your speech this house. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I didn't really understand. You were talking about the bell. Was that like a doorbell? And you said
The bell, the dogs were barking. Yes. So, you have a dog? I'll answer you. I have a dog. Whenever the bell rings, when you have a dog, the dog is alert. And the moment the bell rings, he starts barking.
so the bell is the doorbell?
So, and this tells you to be aware of who is coming in. And if you are not a nice person, he will not only bark, but he will also bite. So, is there anything else? Yes. Look, I started with German, of course. I was born in German, but I never went in school in German language. I got a stipendium of 3 weeks learning German law in Austria because it was just a gift I got. I mean, in the year 2003, I was for 3 weeks in the University of Graz. And afterwards, but I don't know a word. I heard Polish language in Belgium, but I don't know it. In Vittel, the language was, most of it was perhaps even English and not French, because most of the prisoners were of British origin. They were not on, there Catholic and other Protestant and other, not only Jewish, because that place was meant to be a detention place in order to send prisoners for prisoners exchange. So they started, and I told you, and I think they always made something looking like a school, teaching you to read and say some words in English. I met there, I think because of my mother, 2 young women, and they took care of me and they tried to teach me English. I'm sorry that I don't have kept the copybook because they wrote a wonderful calligraphy way, and that was bat, cat, and like this. And those 2 women were young women, Catholic, and we kept in touch with them. And afterwards, I got the pictures when they married Christ. It means they became sisters. And from there, in the DP camps, the language was French. So I started to speak French. And as I told you, when I came to Lourdes, I was 1.5 years in France. I spoke quite well French, and I could make the exams that children used to do at my age. I don't know. I was not in school before. That's why I learned the first letters just in the prisons when somebody wanted to take care of me to let me learn something too, and I was a very good pupil there, and from there I came to Israel. When I came to Israel, there were almost no books in France, in French language, so I read at that time there were readers, books, every book with a certain amount of words adjusted to the grade you were in, and I could read. So I at the beginning, not knowing Hebrew, I read a lot of books in English. And afterwards, of course, I was in Hebrew school, in Hebrew university. The main language is in Hebrew, and the best language I know is Hebrew for today. That's about the languages. Is there anything else I can answer? Okay. No, I will not agree, because these were the exceptions. What was the plurality? First of all, I can tell you also another thing. People were also very afraid. As I told you, the seamstress, yes, she once let us in, but she will never take us in anymore, or she would never have dared to have somebody after this, because there was no way. If that officer who stayed with her at that night would have found us, he would have no problem, would have shot her at that time and shot us down. There was no other conclusion I can come. But I stress the point, that's why I say, nobody should be brainwashed. Everybody should think for himself what is good to teach, to do to your fellow. And if that is not good for you, so don't do it to somebody else. Yes? And there is perhaps you can look in the Wikipedia and see there is a manifest which was written by survivors in Israel. The name of the survivor who wrote the manifest after, I think, 2 or 4 years ago, stating that the conclusion of what we had is to treat persons in a good way. No racial difference. We want everybody to be able to have his religion, to do whatever he wants. And we tried, most of us who have survived, tried to do our best. And I can tell you that in the War of Independence for Israel, 60% of the killed soldiers were newcomers who escaped the death camp. So the most who fought for Israel were a lot of survivors, and a lot of survivors did the best of building up the state of Israel till now. You can read the commemorations, you can read about it. Is there another question? Okay.
Yes, you're talking about being in, probably again, Detail. And when typically do you remember this in detail?
On the 12th of September 1944, I was with Asa, where is Asa? Itai. Here with Asa the soldier. We came to Vitel together on that special day, he wanted to see the place and was liberated.
And then, I'm sorry, I have another question. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the
DP camps? Okay. DP camps, you understand, D-Day was in June. I was liberated in September. But when did the war end? May 1945. So in the meantime, you couldn't move freely. I couldn't leave France and go to Palestine or somewhere else because the war was going on. So the DP camps were for the time till people could be settled in the way they wanted to or go to. And the life in the DP camp was freedom. My mother was a director of the DP camp we were in. It means she took care of the food which was distributed. We had a kitchen. I'll tell you, the camps, DP camps I was in, I had great luck. They were in hotels which were confiscated by the Free French. The hotel which worked with the Bosch were the Nazi called, were afterwards confiscated and served as DP camps. So I was in the first DP camp was in La Bourboule, which is Massif Central, is the center of France, and we stayed there in hotel. And afterwards, when we came to Lourdes, that was the same thing. We stayed in the DP camp was organized in the confiscated hotels of those who were collaborators of the Nazis.
So you went to a DP camp after you were liberated, and then you went to the school in France, or am I?
I didn't understand.
Did you say you went to a school in France, or was that what the DP camp was?
When did you go to the school in France?
In DP camp. In the DP camp. I started, the first time I went to school was for a month or two in La Bourboule, and afterwards I went in school in Lourdes. In Lourdes, I went in school with the regular French children. There was no difference. All my friends were French.
How old were you then?
At that time, 10 years.
10 years old.
Another question? Okay.
I was just wondering if the children had
Please, slowly, come
Did
here.
your children have a chance to know your mother?
My children, of course. My mother died at the age of 80. She got a present from the camp, which is sugar. Yes, diabetic. And they had amputated one leg. She didn't want to live on at that time. Anything else? No. Thank you very much.